episode of the Hey Dr. Kyra podcast. My name is Kyra Adams, PhD. I'm a current professional earth scientist, and this is a show where I talk about everything related to my life as a scientist, how I got here, how I am staying here, and some things about academia. If this wasn't clear, although I have some branding on my previously identified job at a fancy space company, federally funded, it is a personally produced show, and I am the producer, writer, the guest, and speaker, whatever else, sponsor. So it's really a place for me to share my life in academia. And today, I wanted to talk about how to get into the graduate school of your dreams. So this is going to be a practical episode where I kind of go through the steps and just release all the tips that I have acquired going through different levels of graduate school, and now also being on the other end where I'm taking in applications to hire students or decide to work with students. So I think honestly the first place we should start is who actually should go to graduate school. Like, if you don't have a graduate school of your dreams because you don't care about grad school and you're not gonna go to grad school, I think that's fantastic. Congratulations. You've settled on a career path that's probably more practical and profitable, and suits your talents or whatever. So I don't think everybody needs to go to graduate school. I also think as a society, there's less emphasis on like formal education, like college graduate, PhD, master's, unless it actually really requires it for that career path. So, you hear of those stories like a 16-year-old has a business doing, crocheting unique hats and they're bringing in millions. Like, I think, societally, we're really pushing for this entrepreneurial rise and finding your talents. I think we've also come far enough in wealth together as a society where these things are possible and supported. Obviously, 1960s Korea didn't have the wherewithal to allow people to pursue their passions, but now we have come further in the collective wealth, I would say. So if you don't have graduate school of your dreams, that's great. I also saw this article recently where I think Harvard had seen the least amount of applications for their undergrad program. Something along those lines. Like, they've seen a dip in the amount of applicants every year, and they've seen one of the lowest recently. And I think that's indicative of what people are going through. College is expensive. There are ways to flourish your talents and make money off of them and support your life. So I think those are common things that are happening. I do want to do an episode at some point about the future of academia, because there's some things in academia that I'm going to expose it all and talk about it, and maybe it'll upset some people in my industry, but it's like kind of what we talk about at the water coolers at work anyway, right? Be all pessimistic. That's so new. All scientists, I think, are kind of pessimistic. I'm trying really hard not to be. Anyway, but if you do have a grad school of your dreams, I think this episode will be helpful. So who should actually go to grad school? I'm speaking from a STEM aspect. Like, I've done STEM as my major push of my career. So this might not quite apply to humanities. I do have a music degree. Fun fact. I got my BS in geology and I was a double major in music. They didn't allow me to minor in it. So I have a BA in music. So I've kind of seen both like the science side and the humanities side of how people progress and choose whether to stay in school or not. But this is predominantly going to be colored by my experiences in STEM. So just putting that out there. So if you are a STEM major in undergraduate and you want to pursue research or development, any kind of like R&D, whether that's within academia or outside in industry, I think a graduate degree is extremely helpful. If you don't have any like research experience in undergrad, which a lot of people don't, there's some schools that really support that, or you have to kind of go find your own opportunities and try to work for a professor, and there's just like limited opportunities for you to be fully immersed in research. But if you do have that, I think that's great. But if you don't, if you're trying to go into some kind of research career, obviously you're going to need to be trained a lot in just the day-to-day research life. And there's a lot that comes with the technical expertise of like running instruments, safety, safety things that you should be wary of, just regular techniques on how to manage a project, how to manage like even lab space, coordination, logistics, all of that. You really learn a lot of that by being in lab and in a research setting. And a master's degree or a PhD will really give you the opportunity to experience that and make that into, bring that into the fiber of your being, put it in muscle memory so that you could go off and do R&D in academia or in research. So I think if you are interested in doing more research, I think that's a good reason. If you feel like you lack coursework, I'm not sure if that's the best reason or that should be the only reason. I only say this because with the rise of like online courses available to you, I think there are ways for you to obtain information in a classroom setting, if you prefer a classroom setting, without having to do a full program. And there's so many certifications that are out that you could do. And so don't rush going into a program. If you actually enter school, it's a lot of tuition. Even if you are being paid to do it, a lot of STEM degrees will pay you to get the degree, right? You have a stipend and your tuition is covered through your research hours. But it's still a big commitment. And so I would say take your time. If you feel like you just want more coursework or you feel like you're lacking knowledge in a specific thing, there are other ways to obtain that knowledge. And if you're going into a company, 100%, they will train you for what you need to know. Okay, I don't want to hash this part too much because I do want to get to the practical steps of how to get into grad school. But to just lay the foundations and just to build out, how do I prepare myself to be a successful candidate? I think that starts way earlier than when the applications are due. So I would encourage everyone who may be on the fence about grad school to really think about this for a while, and not make, last minute decisions like, oh, I'm just gonna go to grad school. But because, it is again, a bigger time commitment, and also because I think if you do prepare for it in advance, it really makes you stand out as a candidate. And the chances are that you'll actually then go into the grad school of your dreams rather than the grad school that accepts you. Sometimes those things work out too. You don't have to dream about something to land there and love it. I certainly didn't dream about some of the things that I went through in my life, but I landed it and I walked into it, or I was accidentally there and it happened to me and I loved it. So the catchy title aside, let's just get that straight, okay? Okay, so how do I actually prepare to be a good candidate to be accepted to grad school? I think for that, you have to kind of understand how some of these STEM degrees hire graduate students. So in undergrad, you're used to the school opening up a certain number of spaces for applicants, and you apply and you have your cover letter or personal statement. They sometimes request different prompts for the different schools that you have to write a ton of essays. I know this is changing really rapidly. Some schools have standardized tests that they want to see, but you basically put together this packet and then you say, I'm going to be a strong candidate for your school because we're culturally the same. I would add to your, environment, blah, 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 blah. But graduate school, like I've mentioned previously in a different episode, is a more targeted process. And the reason for that is because, especially in STEM, because the degree is sponsored, meaning you don't pay tuition, like you're not paying your money to go to the school, but the school will cover your tuition through research funds, and then they'll also have to pay you a stipend. This varies across the board, across the country, across nations. Like the system is very different, but just speaking from a general STEM degree, Humanities, I actually don't know how it works for getting your tuition covered and getting a stipend and things like that. I know there are research tracks for like history and English and things like that where, I've seen my friends go through their PhD that was completely tuition free or tuition covered. But for STEM, that's how it works. And because of that, there's just going to be less spots open because they have to make sure that there is a research grant or a research project associated with your job, your position. So not only are you just a student or a graduate student, like being an apprentice to that field of study, you're actually a quote unquote project worker for a specific research project. So these projects are requested by the professors, right? And if that gets funded, then they could obviously open rooms for students. I know that schools will sometimes have like departmental or college level funds to cover a student. So it's not all based on the professor. I say this because, so imagine you are a faculty member trying to get a master's student and you have 15, 5, 10, whatever candidates in front of you. Who would you pick? It's not just the best student who's performed well in class. I would look at the candidate applications holistically and say, well, I need somebody who can run, for example, the mass spectrometer in my lab. Oh, this student may not have the best grades, but they have experience in a wet chemistry lab that also had a mass spec. Like, wouldn't that pique your interest, right? And so because it's more of a targeted recruit, you also want to build your portfolio for a targeted job market. Does that make sense? So the reason you need to really think about grad school and kind of plan things out is because getting this research experience or the writing experience or whatever the hiring your advisor, future advisor, but the hiring professor would look for is what you want to build. And those things don't come within an application cycle of a few months. So that's what I really wanted to get that out. It's kind of similar to high school, when you have all these extracurricular activities, like people do orchestra, people do sports, and then you add all of that together in the packet, send it to the college. It's kind of like that, but I just want to say it's a little bit more targeted. For me, what really helped was I didn't know I would go to grad school, but I just wanted to work. Like I wanted to work on campus. I wanted to get involved in research. There were a lot of complicated reasons for this, but I knew I wanted to do lab work. So I got involved in lab work really early, and thank you to the generosity of the advisor I was working at the time as an undergraduate worker, I stayed on for quite a bit. And because of that, I think, one, it helped me decide, did I want to go to grad school and be continuing in research, which I did. It helped me. After years of doing it, you kind of know if you want to do it forever or not. I would say forever. If you want to do it for a few more years or not. Okay, let's clarify. And then two, it gets you comfortable talking about like how to run the lab, how to do research things, and it makes you stand out. So I think that was really helpful for me when I was going into graduate school. And don't worry if it's not the exact skill set, because it just shows initiative, and that sometimes that's good enough. So for example, some of the graduate programs I applied for, it was more for coding and computer modeling, which I had very little experience at the time and honestly was like deathly afraid of. And I really hadn't done that in undergrad, during my undergrad. But in my application, what I was able to bring out was that, hey, I have initiative. I've done research in a lab setting, which has then trained me to be able to do research projects and manage my own project. And I know how to report and track progress. I know how to, find the answers that I need to, or things like that. So like there are transferable skills within that kind of work activity that you can translate and really bring out on your cover letter. Okay, the other thing that helped me was I did the honors program within the undergraduate college, and I think outside of just like the fancy honors title that you get on your degree, one thing that really helped me was pull all of the research activity that I did in undergrad as like an actual thesis. It is very rare, I think, for undergraduates to have a graduating thesis unless they're part of like a specific program or a class that calls for it. But because I had that, it really served as like a written portfolio to show to my, potential graduate advisors, like, hey, I know how to do research, but I also know how to write it up, which is a critical part of scientific academia, right? Or any academia, I would say. One thing I wish I had done was actually publish that. So they had offered, like my school had offered, like if you actually want to publish this into a journal article, we have these resources, these writing groups. We actually help you, actually publish it in a journal article. But I just didn't have the bandwidth to do all that at the time. It would have been, I think, really cool to have a publication. I didn't get my first publication until like 4 years into grad school, so it took a while. So if you have the opportunity to do such things like honors programs, lab work, write a thesis to make you stand out, I would say just go for it. Just go for it. It's really going to help you. Okay, so let's pretend that you've done all of these things. You're finishing up your undergrad, or maybe you took a break and you're trying to go back into graduate school and you're trying to apply. What do you actually do? So the academic cycle for these applications are usually, they open like, I would say October, November, and they close around December, January. They evaluate you. Maybe there's an interview in the spring. It really depends on the school. Some schools like to call out the students for a campus visit as an interview slash just like a get to know visit sometime in the spring semester. And then you kind of hear your decision by the end of May, which is the end of the spring semester, so that you can start either in the summer or in the fall. So there's kind of this academic cycle to this. And you can really play that to your advantage because a lot of the conferences are embedded in between. So if you're really serious about getting into your grad school program, I wouldn't recommend just sending in an application point blank. And that's because of what I just discussed about this like targeted recruiting. So oftentimes, you won't actually know who is available to be your advisor unless you actually talk to them. Undergraduate, you kind of apply en masse, right? Like there's a big mass flood of applications that come into the school. But graduate programs, although maybe there's like 5 faculty members within the department, that doesn't mean the 5 faculty can all serve as your advisor. And so what you want to do is actually go through these schools and look for someone that you want to be advised by. So this is hard to explain without giving examples. So I'll just give an example of my approach. So towards the end of my senior year, I knew I wanted to do research, and I knew I was starting to get interested in hydrology. I was not a hydrology major. I was like a general geology. So I did more like structural geology. I did more like mineralogy, and hydrology students had like a more targeted program, and I didn't go through it, but I was starting to get really interested in that. And so what I did was I started looking at research papers that I found fascinating, and they span from like a couple years in age, like, oh, they were published a few years before I entered senior year, to like maybe like 15, 20 years. Like 20 years ago, people figured this out. Like, wow, that's fascinating. So if you're uncomfortable doing like a deep dive into literature search because you don't have like research experience, or maybe you're just starting out, or maybe you've been out of school for a while, there's now with the communications emphasis for scientists, now there are like actual news articles that are so easy to digest and read that are associated with the scientific finding. So EOS is a good one, like EOS. So that highlights some of the big, interesting things that are coming out across fields in science. I'm sure technology is easy to find, like LA Times, New York Times, Washington Times reports. on highly interesting technology. So that should be fairly easy to go hunt for. Same thing with engineering. Same thing with math. I think if we have like new mathematical discoveries, that's very highly covered in just general media and outside of research. So that's how you kind of find who are the players in the field and what school they're located in. Brand name value for the schools I find are a little bit, I'd say there's just less emphasis for some of these research threads because it's really about who trains you and not about like where did you go to school. That's just a general statement, and it really depends. The sentiment depends, I think, by country. I think Korea still values the name value of the school even at a graduate level, regardless of field. But just keep in mind as you move forward. And so that's kind of how you find the big players, and then you reach out. So what I did was I knew that applications were closing in December, and I wanted to at least have a chat with them to see if they're hiring at all. So I wrote maybe to 12 faculty members in October. It's best if you actually start early, like August or September. But I was a little late to the game, and I found about 10 to 12 people that I really was interested in for their research, and I reached out to them. Now, having done this reaching out email, how do you actually reach out, to cold email these people? Having done a lot of that, I have found that the best way is to, one, really know their stuff, two, have a really short email, and three, attach any information you want, like your CV, as an attachment. I used to write like 3-4 really well written paragraphs to these people and say, hey, I read your paper, on XYZ, and I found it so fascinating, and blah, blah, blah. And I would explain their work and explain my background and explain why it's linked and why I'm interested in that. And it would be a really long email. I do think that shows thoughtfulness, but professors get tons of emails every day, and sometimes they see a big block of text and they immediately get, intimidated, and they just kind of glaze through it. I have had nice professors that really read thoroughly, but to really grab their attention, I think 1 or 2 paragraphs is best. I would even say a few sentences. I said, hey, there was an email that I had crafted towards the end as I was starting to see how they were not responding to my long ones. I was starting to ping them a second time, like, hey, just in case you missed it, I'm so-and-so. I'm interested in your work because XYZ. I read your paper. I think these are some of the thoughts I had about it for a potential research project. Here's my CV. Those emails, I always got a response. The long ones, I would have to re-email them. So I have found out that this is just kind of the best strategy. Make sure you have a resume or a CV you attach so they can actually see your credentials. When you do that, people will kind of either tell you, oh, I'm really interested in learning more. Let's do a virtual call to get to know each other more. Or they'll say, hey, I'm actually not hiring any students at the moment. I don't have any funding. And so you say, well, thank you for considering, and you move on. They will sometimes refer you to a different colleague of theirs that might be looking for students. And that way, when you do send in your official application to the school, they already know your name. They already have talked with you. And I think this is going to really set you apart when you send in your application. Okay, following up, I also did, well, this is, I think, not everybody can do this, especially international students. But I think because everyone is comfortable working and connecting virtually now after COVID, I think it is a little bit easier nowadays. But what I did was I went to AGU, which is a huge conference for earth sciences, and I made sure to put meetings with them. I said, hey, after a couple emails, I would say, well, I will be attending AGU. If you are around, I would love to, chat with you regarding the position. And I would have like 15, 30-minute meetings with them. Just ask for like a quick coffee chat or a quick chat in between sessions where I ask questions about their research project and just kind of get to know the professor a little bit more in person. Some of them went really well. Some of them went for hours because we were just talking about research, and I even did a campus visit right after that, and then the funding didn't work out, so I didn't end up being able to go there. But, some of them were really long and very promising. Some of them were like 5-10 minutes, and I was like, oh, I don't know if they really want to hire me. But, eventually the conversation evolved, and that also worked out. So if you can actually meet them at a conference, I think that's fantastic. It's low stakes because you're both there for a conference and not for like an actual visit or anything like that. If you are international, I know that's tricky, but some of these bigger conferences is going to be maybe a good try. That's why I say like build relationships early with these professors. Like your applications should be starting, or at least you should be thinking about these applications way before just the application cycle, which is a few months. But yeah, if you can't do in-person conferences, try to connect with them on a one-on-one call, definitely. If you think it's going in a promising direction, it's also not a bad idea to connect with their students if you can locate them, or if you can ask them like, hey, I would like to also connect with your students to get a better feel for your research group. But that conversation can come after the offer is already made. And so that's something that you can consider. Okay. And I think I want to bring up how to write. Well, there's the CV part and the personal statement part. And I'll just touch on those briefly. For the CV/resume, I know this is like one of those things where you say, don't do as I do as I say, whichever the saying goes. Because I know that if you are looking at some of these CVs of faculty members on their website, it looks terrible. And I too was at one point an aspiring grad student, a senior in undergrad, and I was like, I have no idea how to format and write my resume and CV. Let me look at some of these professor CVs on their website as a reference. And I opened them, and it's like a floodgate of 50 pages with like the basic font. It would be like, if it's Times New Roman, that's a little bit more sophisticated, but they're like Arial or like Calibri, which is like, okay, it's nice, it's clean, it's there's no ounce of personality on it, so you don't risk being judged right away. But it would be like a word vomit of like, I did all of this stuff, and it would be like so hard to follow. There's like no theme, rhyme, or reason. And then they would be like, oh, your resume is hard to read. I was like, why? Because I put the color purple in it for my header, or So I think the younger generation, I don't think I'm the younger generation, but like even younger people, they have really nice CVs and resumes. So in academia, we don't do the one-page resume that's pretty standard in industry. The industry resumes look beautiful. Like they're all designed beautifully, they're catchy, there's pictures, there's colors, it's so slick. Academic CVs it's called curriculum vitae. Do you call it vitae or is it vita? Is it curriculum vitae? Anyway, the CVs, they're supposed to be a complete list, mostly complete list of all the things you've done for like publications, conferences, teaching, grants, awards. And because of that, it could run several pages. But for some reason, the norm has been like the less formatting there is, the better. And like you're taken almost more seriously if your CV looks like intimidatingly unorganized. And I mean, they're still quote unquote organized. Like there's a header, publications, and then there's a list of publications, but it's just like so boring, and there's nothing, like there's no flair, there's like nothing there. So, I know there are not a lot of great examples out there to those aspiring students, and I'm really sorry on behalf of academia. But if you can make it somehow clean and organized and nice, I think that's helpful. Um, but don't go too far on the other end of having almost like an industry resume where it looks too designed. I don't even know how to describe this. I feel like this is weird. I feel like people should have pretty CVs, but I've gotten comments on CVs where I had an extra flair, so I've made mine pretty thorough. I do think I've done a pretty good job. I'm really happy with the way that I formatted mine currently. Like, it has a fancy font that looks like Times New Roman, but it's not. You have to download it. And it's one of like the fancier ones, but it looks still really professional. It's very similar to Times New Roman. It's just that the width I could change a little bit more with the boldness. So there's a little bit of that flair. And then I've made sure that there's like lines that are clean. I've made sure that the spacing between like ears and the actual content is all like uniform across sections. So little things like that, I think, help make it look a little bit more intentional than having this basic CV that I've seen a lot of my seniors do, which I think at the time was great. And I think now it's like, because they're so high up in academia, it's like almost this power symbol, but I'm not as qualified to have that power symbol of a bland CV. So I've jazzed mine up a little bit. Okay, so that's on resumes and CVs. If you're writing these emails to professors, I think a resume is fine. You're also probably an undergraduate. So you're probably not going to have like a huge CV anyway. And especially if you're coming back to school after a break, you probably have your industry resume left over. So you could just reuse that. Okay, lastly, personal statements. How do you write a good personal statement / cover letter? The application requires different things by school, so I just want you to take this with a grain of salt and kind of apply it across whatever piece of writing you have to generate. Some ask for an actual research statement. Some schools ask for just a personal statement. Some schools ask for actual cover letter plus like a research statement. So whatever you write, just apply this. But for something like a personal statement or a CV, or a cover letter, now that I'm like reading them to see who I want to hire, just don't make it into a repetition of your CV. Don't list all the things that I would have already seen in the CV in paragraph form and just write me that statement. Like, don't do that. This is a time for you to shine. So remember that. This is a time for your personality and your writing style to come through. Now, with the advent of AI and them writing professional emails for us, I don't know how that's going to change. But, let's be honest and actually let's say that you're actually writing it yourself. This is a time for you to like really show your writing style and highlight the things you want to highlight from your CV and also address your weaknesses. I will say I recently had a candidate that approached me and I saw the CV. I was like, okay, well, I don't really know if this is like within my research field. I don't think this is like maybe the best fit. But then the cover letter completely changed my mind. And I've never had that experience where the cover letter was so on point that it changed my mind. First of all, the writing was flawless. Like, there was a very clear beginning, middle, end. Like, there was a perfect flow. And the layout was very much like, this is what I've done. This is the commonalities in my work to yours. Remember, I was worried a little bit about the expertise being a little bit discrepant. And then it talked about like the vision, like, this is what I hope to do. And then it addressed the weaknesses that I was worried about. Like, oh, I don't know if they've done this kind of stuff. Perfectly addressed. Like, these are the reasons why my skills are transferable to this project. This is how I'm actively trying to prepare myself to walk into your project or something along your project. And this is a document, this case, XYZ, is a documented success case of how I've navigated a similar situation and a similar problem, research problem. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the best cover letter I've ever like read. And so that's my message that I want to impart. Make sure that you can highlight things that set you apart as a candidate in confidence. Like really go in confidence, and make it into a conversation instead of just telling me like, yeah, da, 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 da. Make it into like, this is what I think, you know, and you can end with like, thank you for a thoughtful consideration. Looking forward to hearing from you. Then it really sounds like you're opening doors for a conversation. I really think that will set you apart as an applicant when you're entering graduate school. Okay, so I've talked about, I think, all of the technicalities and the logistics of going into graduate school and applying for it, that I thought was really helpful for me when I was going through the process. The last bit I want to say is maybe the reference letters. They're also important. Make sure you have really good references. Have conversations with them early on about it. Make sure you have a tangible relationship with them. Sometimes you might think you have the professor really well, but you might be 1 in 300 students. So if you know you want to get good reference letters, you want to continue the conversation with them and say, you know, just kind of keep them up to date on what you're doing. Or if you do only have a short period of time that you've known them and they are still the best candidate for your reference, you know, I would have a conversation with them that's pretty serious and say, hey, this is why I want to go do this. This is my overall vision. So you need to make sure they can really, truly advocate for you. So again, I feel like a lot of this is like being intentional with building relationships with people that could support you. The references, the potential advisors, and even friends that could maybe talk you through some of these things. Like, why do you want to go to grad school? Why do you want to do this? You know? Okay. So I think that is a good place to wrap it. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening. I know this was a more practical episode. So my podcast is kind of casting a wide net for audience because it's such a jump between different topics, but it's been a pleasure, and I will talk to you in a different episode. Bye.